I had never known fear like this. My hands were shaking as I held my daughter, Emily, in my arms, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her tiny body. Her breathing was shallow, each wheeze sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Just minutes ago, she had been fine, laughing, playing with her dolls, until she suddenly collapsed, her lips turning an eerie shade of blue. I barely had time to think before I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice barely steady enough to tell the dispatcher our address. They assured me an ambulance was on the way, but as the seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity, I knew that if they didn't get here soon, I could lose her. I kept whispering to her, begging her to hold on. I had never felt so helpless in my life. Then, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Our HOA, a gated community ruled by a self-appointed queen named Karen, had an entrance that required a special code for emergency vehicles. I knew this because I had fought with them before about how ridiculous it was. I bolted to the front door and sprinted outside just in time to see the flashing lights of the ambulance as it pulled up to the gate. But instead of the gate opening, the ambulance just stopped. I frowned, my stomach twisting in dread. The engine idled, red and blue lights reflecting off the pristine iron bars. Something was wrong. I ran towards the gate, my heart pounding against my ribs, but before I could get close, I saw her, Karen. She stood there, arms crossed over her chest, an infuriating smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. She wasn't just the head of the HOA. She was its dictator, a woman who reveled in power, a person who treated the rules not as guidelines but as scripture. And right now, she was using them as a weapon. "They can't come in," she said as I reached her, her tone dripping with smug authority. I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What? My daughter is dying. Let them through." I could hear the EMTs behind her, trying to reason with her, but she simply held up a manicured hand, silencing them. "Sir," she said, in that condescending tone she always used at HOA meetings, "I understand that you're upset, but we have rules in place for a reason. Emergency vehicles need prior authorization. If I just let them through, it sets a bad precedent." I could barely breathe, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "Karen, are you serious right now? My daughter is inside. She can't breathe. Let them in." She shook her head, giving me a pitying look as if I were some unruly child. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules. If we start making exceptions, then what's the point of having a gated community in the first place?" I turned to the EMTs, desperation clawing at my throat. "Can you break through it? Ram it?" The paramedic, a man who looked just as frustrated as I felt, shook his head. "We're not allowed to damage property unless law enforcement authorizes it." We called them, but I didn't hear the rest. My vision tunneled, and all I could focus on was the fact that precious seconds were slipping away. Seconds Emily didn't have. I shoved past Karen, running to the gate controls myself, punching in the code I knew wouldn't work. It had been changed months ago, only board members had it now. Karen sked. "Now that's property damage," she mused. "I could fine you for that, you know." I turned on her, rage bubbling up so fiercely I could barely see straight. "I don't give a damn about your fines. Open the damn gate, Karen. My daughter is going to die." She sighed, tapping her chin, pretending to think about it. "Well," she said, dragging out the word, "if you had followed proper HOA procedure, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation." The paramedics were calling dispatch again, demanding an override, but it was taking too long. Too damn long. I thought of Emily, her tiny body on the couch, her fragile chest struggling to rise and fall. Every moment wasted here was another moment closer to the unthinkable. I looked back at Karen, this woman who had fined me for leaving my trash cans out an hour too long, who had threatened to tow my car because it was an eyesore, who had turned the HOA into her own little kingdom. And now, she was holding my daughter's life in her hands like it was just another power trip. I knew then that I couldn't wait any longer. If she wasn't going to open that gate, I would. I didn't think. I just acted. My body moved before my brain could even register the consequences. With my daughter's life hanging by a thread, I had no time for bureaucracy, no time for Karen's smug smile, no time for rules that valued property over human lives. My feet pounded against the pavement as I ran toward the gate's control panel, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't care about fines. I didn't care about HOA policies. I didn't care if the police were on their way. My little girl was dying inside my home, and this woman, this power-hungry, self-righteous monster, was treating it like a minor inconvenience. "Sir, step away from the gate," one of the paramedics called, his voice tight with warning. I ignored him. I ripped the cover off the control panel, wires spilling out in a chaotic tangle. I wasn't an electrician, but I knew enough to recognize the locking mechanism. My hands shook as I reached for the wires, my mind racing. I could try to short-circuit it, force it open manually. Vandalizing HOA property is a serious offense. Karen sang from behind me, her voice sickeningly sweet. I turned on her so fast she actually took a step back. "If you don't open this gate right now, Karen, I swear to God." She smirked, arms crossing over her chest again, her stance screaming triumph. "Or what? You'll break it? Go ahead. I'll have the police on you so fast your head will spin." Something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about a gate. It wasn't about some ridiculous rule that had no place in a life-or-death situation. It was about power. Karen got off on control, on enforcing rules for the sake of it. She wasn't stopping that ambulance because she believed in the HOA's policies. She was doing it because she could. But so could I. I turned back to the wires, my fingers trembling as I yanked at them. Sparks shot out, the acrid scent of burning insulation filling the air. The ambulance sirens wailed behind me, their urgency matching the pounding in my chest. A second later, I heard the metal groan. The gate didn't fully open, but it lurched, just enough for a person to slip through. Not enough for the ambulance. I whirled back to Karen, fury boiling over. "Open it. Open it now." She rolled her eyes like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "I already told you." I didn't let her finish. I grabbed the walkie-talkie hanging from her belt, yanking it free before she could react. I mashed the button and spoke directly into it, my voice raw, desperate. "This is an emergency. Open the gate. Now." A moment of static. Then, a hesitant voice crackled back. We need board authorization." Karen smirked. I saw red. I turned back to the paramedics. I said, pointing to the biggest one. "You said you can't ram it without law enforcement authorization?" He nodded hesitantly. "Well, consider it authorized," I snarled. Karen gasped, hand flying to her chest. "You can't do that. That's illegal." I turned on her, voice dangerously low. "You're stopping an ambulance from saving a child's life. That's illegal." She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, the ambulance revved its engine. The driver didn't even hesitate. With a deafening crunch, the vehicle lunged forward, slamming into the metal gate. The iron groaned, the hinges shrieking in protest. The first hit didn't do much. The second forced it open another few inches. On the third, the gate gave way with a final, agonized screech, crumpling like paper as the ambulance forced its way through. Karen let out a horrified shriek. "You'll pay for this. You'll be kicked out of the community, I didn't hear the rest. I was already running, sprinting back toward my house, the paramedics close behind. I threw open the door, my heart hammering against my ribs as I saw my little girl still lying on the couch, her face even paler than before. "Emily!" I fell to my knees beside her as the EMTs rushed in, their equipment already unpacked. One of them pushed me back, speaking quickly into his radio as he checked her vitals. The words blurred together, but I caught snippets. Oxygen levels dropping, weak pulse, needs immediate transport. I could barely breathe as I watched them work, my hands trembling. I had done everything I could. Now it was up to them. Karen's voice screeched from outside. I barely processed her words, but I knew she was screaming about property damage, about lawsuits, about consequences. I didn't care. I only cared about one thing. "Is she going to be okay?" I whispered, One of the paramedics looked up, his face grim. "We need to get her to the hospital now. You coming with us?" I nodded so fast my vision blurred. I barely noticed the wrecked gate as I climbed into the ambulance, cradling my daughter's small, limp hand in mine. Karen could sue me. The HOA could evict me. None of it mattered. All that mattered was Emily. The ambulance tore through the streets, sirens blaring, tires screeching against the asphalt as we raced toward the hospital. I sat in the back, gripping Emily's tiny hand, my knuckles white from how tightly I held on. One of the paramedics was working frantically, checking her vitals, adjusting her oxygen mask, murmuring to his partner in clipped, urgent phrases. "BP's dropping. She's not responding. We need to move faster." Every word sliced through me like a knife. I wanted to scream, to shake them, to demand they do more, move faster, save her now. But I knew that wouldn't help. My little girl, my baby, was slipping away right in front of me, and I could do nothing but pray that we got there in time. I leaned in close, whispering in her ear, "Hold on, sweetheart. Daddy's here. You're gonna be okay." She didn't respond. My breath hitched, my chest tightening like a vice. I fought against the terror clawing at my throat, refusing to let myself think of the worst. No, I couldn't lose her. I wouldn't. The ambulance swerved into the emergency entrance, brakes screeching as we came to a hard stop. The back doors flew open, and the paramedics leapt into action, rushing Emily out on the gurney. I stumbled after them, my legs weak, my whole body trembling as I chased them through the double doors. "Sir, you need to stay back," a nurse told me, blocking my way as they wheeled her into a trauma room. I almost pushed past her, almost fought my way through, desperate to be by her side. But I knew I'd only get in the way. I pressed my hands to my face, inhaling shakily as the doors swung shut behind them. And then, for the first time since this nightmare began, I broke. A choked sob tore from my throat, my body shaking as I staggered back against the wall. My baby girl was in there, fighting for her life, and I was useless. I slid down to the floor, my head in my hands, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst. I don't know how much time passed before I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, expecting a doctor, praying for news, but instead, I saw two uniformed police officers. And standing behind them, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of triumph and outrage, was Karen. I had never hated anyone more in my life. The officers stopped in front of me, their faces unreadable. "Sir," one of them said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need to talk." I pushed myself up from the floor, my body still trembling, exhaustion and rage warring inside me. "My daughter is in there fighting for her life because of her." I jabbed a finger in Karen's direction, my voice shaking with fury. "She blocked the ambulance. She almost killed my child." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. You're being dramatic." The officer turned to her, his expression darkening. "Ma'am, we've already spoken with witnesses. We saw the security footage. You refused to let an emergency vehicle through despite multiple warnings. That's obstruction of emergency services." Karen's smug look faltered. "I was just following HOA protocol." "An HOA policy does not override state law," the officer snapped. "You knowingly prevented first responders from reaching a child in critical condition. That's a felony." Karen's face paled. I didn't mean." I stepped forward, my entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. "You didn't mean what? You didn't mean to gloat while my daughter lay dying? You didn't mean to smirk while I begged you to open the gate?" I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You knew exactly what you were doing. And now you're going to pay for it." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Then the officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," he began as he grabbed her wrist. Karen let out an indignant shriek. "You can't do this. I'm on the HOA board. I have rights." The officer ignored her. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something close to satisfaction. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Nothing would erase what she had done. But at least she wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else. I turned away as they led her out, my focus shifting back to the only thing that mattered. Emily. I waited outside her room for what felt like an eternity, pacing the floor, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. Then finally, the door opened. A doctor stepped out, his face calm but serious. "She's stable," he said. My knees nearly buckled. She had a severe allergic reaction. Her airway was closing, which is why she was struggling to breathe. The paramedics got her here just in time. A few more minutes, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I knew exactly what he meant. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Can I see her?" He nodded. "She's still weak, but she's awake." I didn't wait for another word. I pushed past him, stepping into the room. And there she was. Emily lay in the hospital bed, her tiny frame looking even smaller beneath the white sheets. She was pale, her face tired, but her eyes, those big, beautiful eyes, fluttered open as I stepped closer. "Daddy?" Her voice was weak, but it was there. It was real. I rushed to her side, dropping to my knees beside the bed, my hands wrapping around hers. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't care. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm right here." She gave me a small, sleepy smile. "I knew you'd save me." I let out a shaky laugh, pressing my forehead against her hand. "Always, baby. Always." I didn't care about the HOA. I didn't care about Karen. All I cared about was that my little girl was alive. And that was all that mattered.